So here we go with the build. We're just going to get the PCB ready here, finding all of our parts and components that we need. According to the instructions, we start with the transistors, and then with the single diode. And from there we work our way to the resistors and then the capacitors. I don't have footage of mounting and soldering the resistors or the capacitors, but we do a full demo right here of the transistors and the diodes. So everything else is assembled and soldered in exactly the same way. So it's a bit redundant to show every single part. Right here, we're just lining up the values of the transistors. Now, the good thing about the PCB, this is pretty standard with PCBs. They're always going to come labeled so you know where each component is going to go. The value of the component is going to be printed on the PCB in the spot that it goes. And the shape shown in the picture on the board is going to match the shape of the actual part. So with a transistor, the black part of the transistor is a semicircle shape with a flat spot, and so the little picture diagram on the PCB is going to look exactly like that. So you just have to get the right value transistor into the right spot and with the correct orientation. Now right here with the diode, a diode is polarized, so it has a positive and a negative. The negative is indicated on the diode by a white stripe, so the little picture on the PCB where the diode goes has a little white stripe. So all you do is line up the white stripes on there, and that's how you know the diode is in there correctly. The wire on the diode is pretty thick, much thicker than the other parts, so I'm having a little bit of trouble bending the wire and making it flexible to go in there. All the other parts go in pretty easily, but the diode wire is extra thick, so I had to work it a bit more, get a pair of pliers and pull it through. You want to make sure each part is snug down to the bottom of the board. There we go, we just about got it in there now. Making some final adjustments before we get ready to solder it in place. And now we're just about ready for soldering, so flip the board over and get right to it. When soldering, you want to make sure that you get a nice flow of solder in there. You just want a tiny little dot to fill in the hole and make a good connection. Whenever you finish your solder joint, you want to make sure that the solder looks nice and shiny. If it doesn't look shiny, if it looks a little dark or a little gray, that's going to be a cold solder joint, so you just want to remelt it and resolder it until it's nice and shiny. That way it gets the best connection that it can possibly get. And you just do that to each one of the leads. Just one right after the other. You got to go slow, be careful, take your time. Just make sure you don't allow the soldering iron to be on touching the PCB for too long at a time, otherwise it can melt the board, melt the component, damage it, etc. So with soldering, you want to be nice and efficient. You just want to touch the soldering iron to the PCB for a few seconds and pull it off. And right here, we have the diode and transistor put in place. And we went ahead and soldered all the components in place now. So we have the resistors and the capacitors all put in place right here. And what you want to do is you want to make sure and take some wire cutters and clip off the ends and clean off the edges. You don't want any of the lead ends to touch anything else on the board.